So now we've got a point where by now we should have some sort of project scope. We've thought about what we're going to do, we've thought about all the benefits and how it's going to go, and we got to a point where we should be able to sit down with the stakeholders and say, are we ready to go? Okay, we've got a very good idea about what we're trying to achieve, we know what the resource requirements are, so now we're sitting down and taking it to the next level, say right now we need to initiate this, this project. Remember, the scope isn't all the full details of the project plan, it's a scope, it's a document of definitions. Now we're taking it from let's go from some definitions through to let's start developing out the project plan. So the first thing we need to do is say, well, okay, yep, we are going to go ahead with this project, okay? And that phase is the initiation phase. Okay, that's where we go, yep, thumbs up, we're on. Okay, so we're now committing the organization to beginning the next step phase of the project. Okay, so each phase of a project is a pre-planned and discussed stage between the project manager, the sponsor, and the other various stakeholders, okay, before we go to the next phase. So that's what we've done there. Really, the first phase was develop a scope, but now we're moving into the initiation phase to say, okay, well, let's think about how this is going to come together. Okay, so what we do is we need to make sure that we've got a good scope and that we've done our scope planning. Okay, and what we're doing there is making sure that we're detailing out the scope and we're 100% all very clear on what's happening and make sure it's well written, okay? Clearly written, clearly broken down, so that way we can understand all the different components in that scope. We need to now break it down into tasks, etc., and understand what's going to happen where. The reason being is because later on if we change, we need to go back and say, well, what are we changing? Find the relevant part, find the bits it's attached to and change those. But also so we can plan out the document in such a way that later on we can come back and go, did we achieve what we set out to achieve? So this is starting to talk about key performance indicators, key responsibility areas. Okay, this is where we're starting to get into that phase of detailing things out. Okay, so we want to be able to begin to measure. Okay, we make sure we've got clear scope definition. Okay, so we're now dividing the scope down into major deliverables. So what are the key things that we had? So here's where we've gone from major, big picture items we want to achieve. We're now talking about what is that, and then breaking down into the subcomponents or the smaller manageable chunks. Okay, so if the scope plan was to make a hamburger, and one of the tasks was to cook all the ingredients. Okay, well, what are we cooking? And in the definition, okay, we're going to need a meat patty, we're going to need the salad, we're going to need this, we're going to need this, we're going to need this. Your job is to cook the meat patty, your job is to, your job is to, your job is to. Okay, so we're now starting to break things down into a little bit of detail. Now that we've got that, really well defined, scope verification can take place. Okay, so we're just making sure that we've got really clear formal acceptance of the project scope. And this is where we get the sign off. This is where the person goes, yep, signed, happy, here, please sign here so we can begin, okay? So this is where you're getting the manager's sign off, okay? So to make sure that everyone knows what's gonna happen, project manager signs, says, yep, that's what I'm gonna run. The sponsor goes, yes, that's what I want you to do. Everyone signs the documents. Everyone now knows from this exactly what's gonna take place, when and how much and all that sort of good gear, and now we go. So now what happens is if we get down to change, okay, that allows us good change control in that we now have all the details of the project in the scoping document, and if we do need to change anything, now we can get that mutual agreement. Okay, so it needs to have administrative documentation. So if we change anything, all changes in writing, so we can add it to these. So we detail, here was the change, added to there, signed off once again by both parties to make sure that we're all agreed that we know what's going to happen. Because as I say, the last thing you want is to get to the end of a project and then someone to say, oh, what about that? And you were pretty clear that we cut that away, but now they're bringing it up again. So make sure that you have in fact formally cut everything away. Any changes from here on in have to be a new meeting, a new conversation, sign off, added. Okay, so from here on in, we are now committed. Okay, so think about with your scope and managing that, make sure that you've really thought about what is the main objective, think about what am I achieving and when. You should have by now all your SMART goals well laid out. Okay, to get to these bit, make sure you get your SMART goals, right? Particularly in your definitions. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, or relevant, up to you. You can go time and cost bound. Sometimes I also use trackable. So that's time, and that needs to be track. Okay, slight differentiation from the other smart, but look, otherwise it's pretty much the same. We're being specific, what exactly we're trying to achieve. Measurable, how do we measure it? So, how many hamburgers were we cooking? Is it achievable? Can we do that? Is it realistic? Will we do it? Okay, so remember there's a difference between achievable and realistic. Achievable says, can I? Realistic says, will I? Okay, time bound, so we know when this is going to happen, and then trackable, so how are we making sure we can count it? All right, so that's a little bit more on the scope planning and making sure we've got all our definitions down, okay? So think about our SMART goals, that all needs to be in there. All our measurements of success all need to be in there. We need to break all our details down, particularly in scope definition, so we know exactly who is doing exactly what, when, how, where, when, why, and starting to build those things forward. All right, great.